Hey guys, welcome to the first ever episode of Always Time for True Crime, a podcast that dives into murders and missing person cases. I'm your host, Julia, and today we're going to be diving into a case that I think a lot of you may not be familiar with. This crime happened in my hometown of Toronto, Ontario, Canada. It's the case of the Pan family. Han and Bic Pan were two Sino-Vietnamese immigrants who came to Canada separately in 1979. As Han was only 26 at the time, he came over with little money and barely spoke any English. He and Bic got married in Scarborough, an area of East Toronto, and soon after welcomed two children, Jennifer in 1986 and Felix in 1989. In almost every article that I've read about this case, it's mentioned that Han and Bic were incredibly hard workers, as they wanted their children to have a stable childhood and also set the foundation for the next generations. Han regularly got up at 5 a.m. to go to work at an auto factory and often worked overtime as well. The couple also never went back to Vietnam to visit their family and friends because they wanted to save up money for their children's education, which I think says a lot. So, in 2010, after 25 years of hard work, the Pan family was doing well. They were able to purchase a large house in Markham, just about 30 minutes outside of the city, and they treated themselves to luxury cars. The children were also seemingly doing well. Jennifer, now 24, had been accepted to the University of Toronto on a full scholarship, and Felix, 21, was studying engineering in nearby Hamilton, just over an hour away. However, on November 8th, 2010, things were about to change for the Pan family. It happened just after 10 p.m. Han was upstairs in bed, while Bic was downstairs watching TV and soaking her feet after just coming back from a swing dance class, which is the cutest thing ever. Jennifer was upstairs getting ready for bed, and like I mentioned before, her brother Felix was away at university. It was then that three armed men burst through the door demanding money. One stayed with Bic while the other two ran upstairs to get Han and Jennifer. One of the men escorted Han downstairs to be with Bic, while Jennifer handed over $2,500 she had earned from piano lessons to the other, before he then tied her to the banister, hands behind her back, with a black shoelace. Next, all three men took the parents downstairs to the basement, where Han handed over $60 from his wallet. He was then shot twice, once in the shoulder and once in the face. He immediately fell to the floor, unconscious, but miraculously still alive. Terrified and realizing her daughter was still upstairs, Bic begged the man not to hurt Jennifer, before she too was shot. Bic was shot in the head 3 times and died instantly. Now, while the men were downstairs with her parents, Jennifer was actually able to call 911. Let's take a listen to the recording. Okay, so I know that was a little bit difficult to hear as the quality of the recording isn't amazing. So let's go through it. So Jennifer calls 911 saying that she needs help. She doesn't know where her parents are and that somebody broke into the house. It does take quite a while for Jennifer and the operator to communicate what the actual address is. Jennifer says 238 Helen Avenue, but the operator hears Avenue Road, and then Jennifer says that's correct, and then there's a little bit of back and forth between them there. However, what I really want you guys to pay attention to is about 35 seconds in. You guys can hear Han come upstairs screaming, and that's when Jennifer tells the operator that her dad has just run outside. This was one of the details that I actually found a little bit fishy about the 911 call, and I'll get into that further in just a couple of minutes. Police arrived at the scene just after a couple minutes and immediately rushed Han to the hospital. Bick, like I said earlier, was pronounced dead at the scene, and Jennifer, although visibly shaken, she wasn't physically injured, so she was brought to the police station immediately to be interviewed. Jennifer gave her statement to police, and I think almost immediately they started to realize a couple of discrepancies in her story, most notably how she was able to call 911 when her hands were tied behind her back to the banister. And then there were a couple other facts that didn't completely add up to the police. Like I mentioned earlier, the Pan family had two very nice luxury cars that were untouched, both in the driveway, and even though the keys were in the front hall. There was also expensive jewelry, TVs, and I think there was even some cash on the counter that they easily could have taken, which made the police think that the number one motive was not robbery. I also just want to jump back to the 911 call for a minute. So, as I said before, Jennifer hears her dad screaming and then tells the phone operator that her dad has just run outside. This is definitely a possibility, but I'm just thinking if you and your wife have just been attacked and you know your daughter is upstairs, why would you run out of the house first without checking on your daughter or trying to help her? And I think police had the same train of thought because they immediately thought of Jennifer as their number one suspect. There was one question that stuck out to investigators, though, and that question was, why? Jennifer was a straight-A student and a seemingly very well-rounded young woman. So what motive would she have had to be involved in such a heinous crime? To be able to even start to answer that question, we're gonna have to back up quite a bit. Let's go back to her childhood. So, like I said before, Mr. and Mrs. Pan worked incredibly hard to give their children a good upbringing. However, the expectation was that Jennifer and Felix would do the same. And therefore, Han and Bick set incredibly high expectations for these two children. Jennifer was put in piano lessons at age 4 and was enrolled in a very intense figure skating program until she then tore a ligament in her knee and, of course, was then no longer able to skate. There are also reports that outside of school, she swam and practiced martial arts, and then when she got into high school, she played flute for the school band. However, with all of these extracurricular activities, she was still expected to do very well in school. This was particularly hard for Jennifer because she was doing really well in middle school, but when she got into high school, her grades started to drop, and she was getting grades in the 70s, which is not a bad grade, but I guess her parents expected her to be at the top of her class. I know it's really common for a lot of kids, including me actually, where they're doing really well in middle school and they're at the top of their class, but then once they graduate onto high school, their marks drops and they feel average. And I think a lot of kids feel belittled by that. After Jennifer's grades began to drop, she started forging her report cards. She would paste a new letter grade over her actual grade and then photocopy it to make it look real. So you can really see the effort that she went to try to trick her parents into thinking she was doing well. Many of Jennifer's friends and high school peers confirm that her parents were very, very strict and put a lot of pressure on her and Felix. They even went so far as to call Han the classic tiger dad, which, if you're not familiar, refers to parents who put a lot of stress on their children to succeed academically and in extracurriculars. I also got the impression that this term is primarily used in Asian American homes. 2 days after the murder, Jennifer was brought in for a second interview and confided in Detective Randy Slade about what it was like to grow up in such a strict household. She claimed that she was never allowed to date, wear makeup, attend school dances, and at the time of the murder, when she was 24 years old, she had a curfew of 9 p.m. I was pretty lucky growing up. My parents weren't too strict. I was also the youngest child, which I heard apparently influences your curfew a little bit because your parents maybe don't care as much when it's their last child. Anyway, I could just not imagine having a curfew of 9 p.m. when you're 24. So, while I agree that 9 p.m. is a pretty insane curfew for someone of this age, it turns out her parents had a reason to keep Jennifer on such a short leash. Like I mentioned before, Jennifer was having a really hard time in high school because she wasn't getting grades that her parents would have deemed acceptable. So while she was lying about her grades, she was also lying about having a boyfriend. While in her junior year, Jennifer met Daniel Wong, a goofy, sociable senior in the school band, and the two started a relationship. However, since she wasn't allowed to date in high school, she of course kept this relationship a secret from her parents. With her marks in the 70s, she was still able to get into Ryerson University in Toronto for a Bachelor of Science. But once Jennifer failed grade 12 calculus, she was really in trouble. You see, once she failed calculus, she was 1 credit short to graduate, and that meant she wasn't going to any university. After this, Jennifer never told her parents that she had failed to graduate high school. In fact, she pretended to be a student at Ryerson University, before then telling her parents that she had been accepted into the pharmacology program at the University of Toronto on a full scholarship. While her parents thought she was in class, she was actually working as a server in an Italian restaurant downtown. She spent the rest of her time in cafes, making up false report cards, false scholarships, and false class notes to show her parents. She even went as far as to buy the textbooks for her courses. And if you've been to university, you know that those books are not cheap. Nevertheless, her charade worked, and her parents couldn't have been more proud. Because Jennifer spent 30 minutes a day going back and forth to, quote, university, her mother, Bick, convinced Han to let Jennifer stay downtown with a friend during the week. But they were under the impression that this friend was female, when in fact, she was staying with Daniel Wong. I could not imagine having all these lies and having to put on a charade 24/7. I mean, that just sounds like a full-time job in its own respect. But apparently to Jennifer, this wasn't too big of a deal because she just kept on adding more to this lie. Her newest addition to her fake life was that she had gotten a job at Sick Kids Hospital in downtown Toronto. I'm not sure why she decided to add this detail. I mean, if you're already getting away with so much, why push it? And I think a lot of us may have seen this earlier, but this lie was going a bit too far and would eventually be her undoing. So after Jennifer had been working at Sick Kids for a couple weeks, her father Han started to realize that she never had a uniform or an ID badge when going to work. And I think that if you're gonna claim that you work at one of the best health institutions in Canada, you should probably make a fake ID badge or at least have some scrubs or something. Like, I don't know what Jennifer was wearing to work, but I imagine if you're wearing jeans and a t-shirt, you're not gonna look very credible. Feeling a little bit suspicious, Han asked his wife Bick to go down to the hospital one day when Jennifer was apparently working and check it out. But once Bick got there, hospital workers told her they didn't have any workers from the University of Toronto. After learning that Jennifer had been lying about working at Sick Kids, they decided to call Jennifer's friend, who she had apparently been staying with during the week. And once realizing that Jennifer had not been staying with this woman, her story really began to unravel. In 2009, when Jennifer's parents discovered all about her elaborate web of lies, including the fact that she was living with a boy and wasn't attending school, her father was livid. He wanted to tell her to leave and to never come back. But Bick, seemingly the more sympathetic and easygoing of the two, was able to convince her husband to let their daughter stay. However, this agreement came with many conditions. First and foremost, Jennifer was to enroll in university. And second, she was to have no communication with her boyfriend Daniel. For the next year and a half, Jennifer was only able to use her laptop and phone under the supervision of her parents, and she had a curfew of 9 p.m. She told the detective that her parents even monitored her mileage on her car so they could see if she was going anywhere that hadn't been pre-approved. Jennifer told her friends that she felt like she was on house arrest, but she still often snuck out to see her boyfriend Daniel, as they were on and off at this point. So this definitely seems really crazy on Jennifer's parents' part, but I'm not sure how my parents would react if I said I was in school when I wasn't, and didn't tell them that I was living with a boy. So I think it's kind of hard to judge the situation if you haven't been involved in it yourself. That being said, I definitely sympathize with Jennifer at this point in the story, although I also understand that she definitely broke her parents' trust. After learning all of this, Sergeant Randy Slade was able to start putting together a motive, and then started questioning Jennifer more intensely. He asked her why she thought the perpetrators left her alive when they had just brutally attempted to murder both of her parents. And her answer was, she cooperated. The investigators on the case didn't buy it, and began watching Jennifer much more closely, even following her to her mother's funeral, where Detective Bill Curtis says in an interview with True Crime Daily that Jennifer didn't even cry. They were also interested to hear Jennifer's story of how she was able to make the 911 call with her hands tied behind her back. So in her second interview, they actually make her stand up and try to reenact this for them. Jennifer shows investigators how she was able to turn her wrist around, grab her phone from her back pocket, and then talk to the 911 operator by yelling into the phone, which she claims was down by her waist. When the detectives asked Jennifer how she was able to hear the 911 operator if the phone was all the way down by her waist, Jennifer has a noticeable pause, before finally saying that she just turned the volume all the way up. Because the interrogations are multiple hours long, I wasn't really able to include any snippets in this episode, but if you guys are interested in hearing them, the interviews and interrogations are available on YouTube. And it seems pretty obvious to me, at least, that the cops are not buying Jennifer's story. But Jennifer's trouble really begins when her father Han awakes from his coma and remembers a different story than what Jennifer had told police. While being escorted downstairs with his wife, Han remembers seeing Jennifer, not tied up, and talking to one of the assailants in a friendly manner. Like, I'm sorry, but Jennifer, how dumb do you have to be to talk to a hitman like you guys are best friends? I guess that shows that she really had confidence in this plan, and she really thought her parents would both be murdered and it would leave no witnesses. But obviously, her plan didn't work out. On November 22nd, 12 days after the murder, Jennifer was brought into the police station for a third time. And this time, detectives were very straight up with her. They told Jennifer how her father's story had differed from hers, and that they knew she was involved. But they were still very gentle with Jennifer, telling her that they were sure she regretted it, and to do the right thing and get justice for her mom would be to tell them what happened. This goes on for about 3.5 hours before Jennifer tells them she's ready to tell the truth. She tells the police that the murder was indeed planned, but that she was the intended victim. She had hired these hitmen to come in and murder her because she was so miserable. But this version is almost laughable, and police do not believe it for a second. Like I mentioned before, her father said that Jennifer was walking freely around the house and even talking to the assailants. But if Jennifer was the intended victim, wouldn't she start freaking out and yelling at the perpetrators once they started targeting her parents instead of her? I mean, according to her father, she was very nonchalant about the thing and even kind of acted like she was going along with it. It seems very clear to me that she just didn't expect her father to survive the attack. And even if Han had been tragically murdered that night, Jennifer still would have been caught, because her text messages gave detectives all they needed. Text messages confirm that Daniel and Jennifer started to plan the murder back in the summer of 2010. With her parents out of the way, Daniel and Jennifer were free to have their life together, and Jennifer would inherit approximately $500,000 from her parents' life insurance policy. Later, in the fall of 2010, Daniel put Jennifer in contact with one of his friends, Leonard Crawford, otherwise known as Homeboy. Daniel knew Homeboy from his group of druggie friends, and Homeboy agreed to kill Jennifer's parents for $10,000. It was supposed to be $20,000 for a hit, but since Jennifer was a friend of a friend, Homeboy was able to give her a little discount, 50% off for friends and family. Daniel then gave Jennifer another phone in which she could use to exclusively contact Homeboy, and with this, they began to plan it all. It was the text messages from this phone that would later seal Jennifer's fate. Ready to put their plan into action, Leonard Crawford, Homeboy, recruited two of his friends, Eric and David, to help. Daniel Wong would be at work at the time, so he would have a solid alibi. Text messages show that on the morning of November 8th, Jennifer texted Lenford Crawford to confirm that this would be the night it all went down. That night, Jennifer finished watching an episode of Gossip Girl before going downstairs to unlock the door for the perpetrators. Then, at 10:02 p.m., Jennifer flashed her bedroom light on and off, a signal to the three hitmen that it was time. On November 22nd, 2010, after her third interrogation with police, Jennifer was arrested for conspiracy to commit murder and conspiracy for attempted murder. Shortly after, police arrested David Mulvaganam, Eric Carty, Lenford Crawford, and Daniel Wong in connection to the murders. And in March 2014, their trial began. However, one of the hitmen, Eric Carty, had his trial delayed after his lawyer fell ill. By 2014, Jennifer and her defense team had updated her story, claiming that Jennifer actually wanted to have the hit called off, but when the hitman found out they wouldn't be getting the money that Jennifer had promised, they broke into her house, murdered her mother, and attempted to murder her father. After Jennifer turned against the hitmen, claiming that they were entirely responsible, Daniel Wong then told investigators that Jennifer indeed did plan to have her parents murdered. So I think it's safe to say that Daniel and Jennifer did not live happily ever after. Finally, after a 10-month trial, and 4 years after the murder of Bic Pan, Jennifer, Daniel, David, and Lenford were all sentenced to 25 years behind bars without the possibility of parole. At his delayed trial, Eric Carty, unlike his accomplices, pleaded guilty and was given 18 years. Along with her sentence, Jennifer's brother and father requested to the judge that Jennifer be forbidden to contact any surviving members of her family. She is also not allowed to have any communication whatsoever with Daniel Wong. Jennifer, as well as Daniel, David, and Lenford, are currently all serving their sentences in different jails across Canada. The last hitman, Eric Carty, was found dead in his cell at age 38 in April 2018. However, there aren't really many details about the nature of his death. Jennifer's younger brother Felix has since moved to the east coast of Canada, where he attempts to live a life that doesn't revolve around the events that transpired on November 8, 2010. As for her father, Han, he gave some insight into his new life in his victim impact statement, and it's absolutely devastating. He says he now suffers from anxiety, insomnia, and depression, and nothing brings him joy anymore. With his injuries, he is also no longer able to work at the factory. He can't bear to be at the house at 238 Helen Avenue, but because of its history, nobody wants to buy it. I did a little digging though, and it looks as though as of January 2020, he was finally able to sell his house. This case was really huge in this area because it ignited so many discussions among Asian American families. Does this type of parenting yield better results? Does this type of parenting maybe cause mental health problems later on? Or was Jennifer's case a complete coincidence? I do think it's important, though, not to blame the parents. This was Jennifer's decision and Jennifer's doing. There are lots of other families that have the same kind of setup, and there are lots of children who have, quote, tiger parents, and they don't feel the need to murder their parents. A lot of people did relate to Jennifer, though, and although that doesn't excuse her actions, people gave her some sympathy. I would love to hear your thoughts on the case, and you guys can let me know on my social media channels. You can follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Always Time for True Crime. This will give you guys the options to see which cases I'm going to be covering next, give you the opportunity to suggest some cases for me to cover, and sometimes I even post a couple sneak peeks. And of course, guys, if you are listening to Apple Podcast and you liked this episode, please go leave me a 5-star review. So go check it out at Always Time for True Crime, and I'll be back next week.